Welcome back to Lethal Hammer's channel. Today we are looking at the 100% minus 0.01% complete build. The reason why I say that is because, like most of you out there, we're never done upgrading our PCs. So in general, I've done a couple different changes to the system, but overall allowing mainly for better temps and a little bit more stable, or I shouldn't say stable, but more stability across the board. So one of the big things that you're going to notice right away is already on the system here is the top loop is CPU only now. So we have our SwiftTech 350 pump sitting here in our 5.2 5-inch bay. I've had to move that a lot more forward, so the tubing sticking out here was a lot less. And then with that, we took the chipset right off of that that loop. And by doing that, we dropped the temp of the actual CPU cores by about 4 Celsius, and then the temp of the liquid flowing through the tubes by about 2.5, 3 Celsius, depending on how warm it is in here. Overall, it was a great change. Gave the case a little more room for the tubing up top here. But overall, the biggest change that we've done is the GPU loop. One, we've added the chipset to the GPU loop, as you can see here, coming off the chipset into the GPUs. And two, we've reversed the flow of the actual water in the GPU loop. So instead of it coming down this way, it's now going up through, and then out the top back to our back radiator back over here. The reason for that is I've been reading online a lot of different things and a lot of, I guess you can call it, theories on how the heat flows and what kind of pressure you can get, etc., etc. So in that, what I did was I tested it for myself. You know, you can read all you want, but until you actually see how your system does with that, you know, you jump full throttle and test it out yourself. So what I did is the 665 SwiftTech pump is still up here. I do have the speed control version of this pump. I would recommend at least running it at the number 4 speed or higher when doing a loop like this, when you're reversing the flow. The main reason is because it's going to require a lot more pressure, or a lot more head pressure from the pump to keep that liquid flowing through. The other big reason why I recommend it is because I do have a lower radiator. Here, I'll move the camera so those of you who haven't seen it. We do have a 240 GTX black ice radiator sitting in the lower tray of our 800D case. We did do a mod to remove the hard drive bay, and you can see that radiator. Well, I don't know how well you can see it in the camera, but it is down there. You can see the 2 fan lights going. The other thing is, with this change, I've moved around some compression fittings and barb fittings and whatnot. And in that, I actually ended up putting a barb fitting on the bottom radiator here, which caused me to put a much bigger loop down here rather than compression fitting with the angle, because I was able to angle a little bit better. So that's why you see a little bit more tubing down here. And because it's 1/2 inch by 3/4 inch tubing, had to do bigger loops to avoid kinks. But back to the system in general. So as you can see here, again, we have the 2 fill ports mounted here with some bushings to give a nice cleaner fill. The reason for that is when it was just the rubber holders there, the tubing had a tendency to kink a lot more. Once again, 1/2 inch tubing gets a little bit difficult to work around. A lot of people will work with 3/8 like I did on the CPU loop, because it bends a lot better, easier to work with in general. But if you're going 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, or 1/2 inch, 5/8 inch outside dimension, definitely recommend doing bigger loops so you don't get any kinking and you know, further reduction in the flow of your tubes. But in that, it goes from the 665 pump down to our 240 rad, comes up from our 240 rad into our GPU number 2, then from GPU number 2 to 1, then to our chipset, out the top of the chipset to our 360 rad, back to the reservoir. Hence this pipe, if you can see this in the far back, it's kind of a little hidden in there. Not exactly where I wanted it, but it's the only place I really could put it, hence since I currently have the radiator in the back. And then it goes into the reservoir, out the reservoir back to the pump. Really good flow, even at the 4 speed. I'm getting, you could see good flow going into the reservoir, so I know that there's good pressure. But outside of that, the biggest thing is we saw 7 Celsius drop in temperature under full load. and then the delta between the GPUs. So when it was flowing from gravity flow from top to bottom, we saw a difference between 3 and 4 Celsius delta between the two GPU cores, which is not super high, but it's kind of high. But when I reverse the flow, now I'm getting a 1 Celsius delta between the two cores. And you must be asking, well, why would the reverse flow do that? And the main reason is the flow is going the way the heat wants to go. So instead of heat being trapped down in the second core because that pump is pushing down that fluid, that heat just flows straight up the way that it wants to go, up. Heat loves to go up. So definitely better flow. Again, for those of you also watching, you know, like I said, we're never done upgrading or changing things. Another thing I'm looking at right now is bringing this 360 radiator on the back side of the case to the inside of the case. I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to do that yet. There's a few things that I'm thinking about. Double mount, whether it be up top or inside or whatever. The biggest thing that's concerning me now is airflow, obviously, in the case, just a factor to deal with. But in that, you know, currently we do have the 360 mounted on the back. We have a 360 radiator mount from Coolants. Actually, it's not a 360 radiator mount, it's just the radiator mount from Coolants. And then we have the 140 millimeter adapter mounted to the back of the case. And the reason for that is that 140 millimeter adapter allows us to mount it to the 140 holes on the case, so we can still use a fan on the backside. Here I'm using a 140 fan still, but it's the slipstream fan that that's lined up with the 120 holes. So I was able to keep a fan on the backside. For those of you wondering how that's done, again, this is mounted, you know, the custom back plate's mounted to the 140 hole, so the fan can still stay there. Outside of that, you know, just going over the specs of the PC, we have the 980X processor running at 4.5 gigahertz, running at 1.435 volts on the V-core. Decent, still a little high, still working out some kinks on those voltages in other areas, still trying to pinpoint the best speeds and whatnot. We have the two EVGA GTX 480 graphic cards. They are running at 902 megahertz on the core, 2202 on the memory. And the temps idle sit around 33 Celsius, and under full load don't go above 46. Great cards, check them out, lifetime warranty on those, and EVGA puts the blocks on there for you. Can't go wrong. You know, a lot of people are saying, oh, they're not full coverage blocks. Doesn't matter. These blocks are showing that they have just as good, if not better, than the EK, the Coolants, and the other blocks out there. Great ones to pick up. I do have my cable sleeve. They were sleeved by a gentleman named Crisis Gamer on the EVGA forums. I've mentioned him many times in my videos. Check him out. Does great work. A lot less expensive than sites like Frozen CPU and stuff like that. He also does full power supply sleeving as well. Check him out. His prices are great. But again, we have the GTX Black Ice 240 radiator down low. Sorry, can't really see it. The GTX Black Ice 360 in the back, and then the X-Flow GTS Black Ice radiator up top in a push-pull configuration. The memory is Corsair Dominators. It is the 1866 megahertz 6 gig kit. I honestly believe that these are rejected 2000 megahertz memory. I am running them currently at 1952 megahertz with our overclock on our processor, and honestly, they're awesome. If you're looking for good memory, I know the Dominators are a little more expensive, but Corsair, I honestly feel, have the best support, best service, and they test those chips very well. Unlike some of the OCZ chips out there, I've gone through so many kits of OCZ that has failed or can't run at the minimum specs. You know, Corsair, great company, definitely recommend them. Check it out. Obviously, we're running the Corsair Obsidian 800D case. It is modified. As mentioned before, we modified the bottom of the case to fit the 240 rad to allow it to suck more air up from the bottom. Some people will just throw a rad down there altogether, but I wanted to make sure we had good airflow on that radiator. And then in the front, if we can wrap around, you can see the front of the case. We have our 2 reservoirs and 2 fan controllers, mainly because we have a lot of fans to control in this system. Overall, great system build. Again, we're never finished, so check back the channel. Again, if you haven't subscribed, do so. Check out our other videos for the performance of this system, and we appreciate you watching.